Welcome to the first video for chapter 1. Before we get to the actual specifics of the chapter, I want to take a couple of minutes and outline my learning philosophy. The philosophy underlying many of my courses is that learning really is the ultimate foundation for competency. This analogy I like to give a lot of my students is that of the boiled frog, which is the idea that if you put a live frog in boiling water, it would jump out. But if you put a live frog in cold water and slowly turned up the heat, the frog would boil. And so what does that have to do with us? We do not want to be that frog that didn't notice the small changes in their environment and therefore died, right? And so what that relates to culture is that management knowledge, especially organizational behavior related knowledge, which is a big part of this course, will allow us tools to help diagnose, understand, and explain on what's happening around us. We will need to learn and adapt constantly because situations constantly change in our ever globalized world. So we want to be the kind of managers that can constantly learn and grow in an environment. Chapter 1 is called The Undertow of Culture. The reason it's called the undertow of culture is just like the undertow in an ocean where we don't see it, but we can definitely feel it, and it can be extremely dangerous, drag us under, and even kill us. Culture is much the same way. We don't often see cultural differences. If we see them, we tend to ignore them. And culture can operate much like an undertow can, in the sense that if ignored, it can pull us under and can destroy our ventures. And so it's very important to be aware of the effects of culture. The first question listed on this slide is actually the same question that has been posted on your discussion forum for chapter 1. And so I'm not actually going to answer this question for you, but I would rather look forward to your answers and responses on why do we need to do business in other countries? In other words, why do international business at all? The second question has to do with how can another country's culture affect you or your life at work? So another way of thinking about this question is, if you never left the country that you were born in, or even the neighborhood that you were born in, how can another country's culture and management practices affect your life, specifically in organizations and at work? Well, one of the ways of thinking about this is the world is becoming increasingly small because it's so globalized. I'm a great example of this because I was born in India, raised in Dubai, and then India, and then the United States, and now I'm here teaching you this class. So here's a person who grew up in several different parts of the world in Asia and is now affecting your life at this university. Organizations operate in much the same way. You can have managers from all different parts of the world that you might have to work with, or colleagues that you might have to work with. And so even if we decided to never leave the comfort of our homes, we can still be affected by the culture and management practices of another country. Of course, recognizing culture and adapting to culture when going and doing business in another country is extremely important. Let's look at a few examples. An American oil company set up a drilling operation in Pacific Island and hired local labor. And within a week, all the foremen that they had hired were found lined up on the floor dead, with their throats cut off. Only afterwards did the American oil company understand what had happened. They had hired younger men as foremen to boss older workers, which is totally not acceptable in a society where age indicates status. And therefore, using their own criteria for recruitment, which was ability rather than age, they failed to anticipate the deadly consequences. Another example of when an American company went to do business abroad and failed because it refused or failed to recognize the culture there was when an American company overtook a textile mill in the United Kingdom. Now, people in the UK loved their tea. Workers at that mill were used to brewing their own tea to their specifications and then taking a long time to sip their pint-sized cup of tea. The American managers thought this was a huge waste of time and so went ahead and installed standard tea brewing machines with 5-ounce cups, which caused a huge riot in the mill where workers basically shut down the factories and the factory never got on track. Finally, the third example listed here is that of British Airways, which ironically was trying to be very globalized when it painted over the Union Jack flag that it usually had painted on its tail fin and replaced those with more global symbols of culture. This caused a huge uproar in British Airways' main customer base, local people from the UK, who thought this was very unpatriotic to do, and hence British Airways had to reverse this decision. So as we can basically see, culture can affect how a company does business both in its own home country as well as in countries abroad. Some people might say that culture is not an important aspect to consider while doing management, because isn't management no matter where you go in the world? In other words, management is often seen as a science. It's seen as a set of principles and techniques that can be universally applied, much like science or engineering. But even science and engineering is affected by culture. Let's look at a couple of examples of where some pure sciences or engineering, which should be the same across the world, is handled differently because of cultural reasons. Civil engineering has several different choices in which they can create crossroads. They can have stop signs, traffic lights, roundabouts, overpasses. Each solution corresponds to a different mindset, either individualistic or collectivist, which we'll deal with those terms a little later in the semester. But the idea is that culture of that country can affect what a civil engineer's choice will be for the best way to cross a road. Similarly, medicine, which should be a pure science and practiced the same way everywhere in the world, is practiced differently depending on culture. As I mentioned, I come from India, and in India, we often have no prenatal sex determination. What that means is that before a baby is born, it is illegal for the parents to try and find out whether the baby is a boy or a girl. There are national and cultural reasons why this is the case. In India, the culture is such that girls get married and go to their husband's home and live, whereas men, even if they get married, always stay in their parents' original home. So the parents always stay with the boy, and thus boys are seen as an investment in retirement, an investment in future, whereas women are seen as a burden for whom dowry would have to be paid to get them married off, and hence lots of families, especially poor uneducated families in India, often want to only have male children, not female children. So before prenatal sex determination became illegal in India, there was a practice where people would try to find out the sex of the baby, and if it was female, they would actually go ahead and abort the child. And hence, India made it illegal for anybody to try and determine what is the sex of the baby before it's born. So as we can see, even medical and engineering practices can differ from country to country because of cultural reasons. So if something as pure as science, engineering, medicine can differ because of culture, of course management is going to be affected by culture. Management, after all, deals primarily with its resource as human beings. Culture should not be seen as a problem to be solved, but rather be seen as an opportunity to be utilized. Every country has a unique set of variables that provides it some sort of competitive advantage. Michael Porter has argued that nations derive competitive advantage from a set of country-level factors such as availability of natural resources, size of the market, nature of government intervention, strategic linkages or networks between buyers, suppliers, manufacturers, and distributors. And different countries have different aspects of each one of these. For example, Denmark has developed insulin because of the links between business and university in its research centers. In Japan, there seems to be a huge linkage between customers and businesses. It's what they called kiritsu, which relies on trust. Germans are big on a concept called Technik, which basically means technical competence, especially in engineering fields. German focus on Technik as much as it provides a cultural advantage to Germany, because Germany has become known for world-class engineered products, it also becomes a source of disadvantage. This is because Germans see business as building something rather than buying and selling companies. Therefore, not many foreign mergers or takeovers happened with German companies. This is also the reason that German companies are lagging in biotechnology, electronic media, fiber optics, etc. Denmark's cultural aspect of janteloven, which basically is the idea of keeping a low profile and not acting too superior to anyone else, resulted in Danish companies not being aggressive enough in marketing. Indeed, when Jan Carlzon, the head of SAS, tried to implement a strategy targeting the business customer, this did not sit well with the Scandinavian sense of egalitarianism. Customers loudly protested when the curtain was drawn after takeoff, separating business class and economy class. The point is to demonstrate that each country has its own unique institutional and cultural characteristics that sometimes creates a competitive advantage, which can become a disadvantage when the situation changes. Next, we'll do a quick exercise. I want you to pause the video in a little bit and write down the answers to these two questions. Describe your culture as you see it and describe your culture as others see it. Use a bunch of adjectives to answer both questions. You can pause the video now. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to answer both questions. Look down on your list. You should have a bunch of adjectives describing American culture as you perceive it, and then a bunch of adjectives describing American culture as you think perhaps others see it. The first is what we call identity, how we view ourselves. The second is what we call image, how we think others view us. National identity and national image are not often the same thing, and each of these have important consequences for success or failure of a company, and even what industries a country chooses to get involved in. Remember Germany with its Technik? Well, Germans are very confident when it comes to engineering any product, but they choose to not get involved with companies that are primarily based on buying and selling other companies. This ends the first video for chapter 1. In the next video, we will be talking about the Johari window.